How easy or difficult is it to do business or run a business in India? While India has made progress when it comes to doing business, but has it been enough? What can the budget do to make things easier? And what are the areas of improvement? To discuss this and more, we have with us today Rishi Agarwal, CEO, Team Lease Director, Nishat Aneja, Professor at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, and Fazal Ahad, Managing Director, Merisys Advisors. Welcome, everyone. So, Rishi, let me get straight to you. The last time we met, you had informed us that there was some astounding 4,600 odd changes, during the year 2020 that affected entrepreneurs. How was 2021?
First of all, Pran, thank you for having me over. Really appreciate it. 2021 was slightly better than 2020. We had 3,580 regulatory changes as compared to about 4,600 in the year 2020. And there are clear reasons for that. 2020, COVID had hit us suddenly, and the entire regulatory environment had gone into a hyperactive mode. A lot of local governments, state governments were issuing notifications left, right, and center while they were still trying to figure out how to deal with COVID. So there were close to 1,200 notifications that came between March of 2020 and January, February of 2021. So that created about 1,000 more regulatory updates in 2020 as compared to what we saw in 2021. But if I were to dissect 2021 regulatory updates slightly more, among the 3,580, about 2,600 updates came from the central government. So that's about 2,600. A lion's share, as you can see, came from the central government. 900 odd came from the state governments. These 2,600 were published on about 437 odd government websites at the central level. Among the 3,580, 450 came from labor. We often say that labor comprises 30% in terms of acts and 47% in terms of compliances. So as you can see, under 8% of the changes that happened among the regulations in 2021 actually came from labor. There were two large categories, finance and tax being one, 1,007 changes from finance and tax, and about 1,024 changes from industry specific, which is where all the regulators sit in. Both of them predominantly in the ambit of central government. There were about 200 plus notifications in the area of EHS, which is Environment, Health and Safety, and close to 300 in the area of secretarial, which includes Ministry of Corporate Affairs and SEBI as the two primary regulators. That's really how the regulatory update scene looked like in the year 2021.
I mean, 3,600 odd, but that is still a huge number, right?
Yes, so that divided by 365, if you do normal math, translates into about 10 updates a day. And this includes Saturdays and Sundays as well. So when you actually take business days, you will translate this into about 15 updates a day. And we did a math on a typical manufacturing company with a small single entity, single office, single plant in single state. And we realized that a typical pharma company operating in one state gets affected by about 800 of these updates in a year.
Wow.
So that translates into about 3 updates a day for such a company.
Wow. Nisha, if I can come to you, we've now heard the numbers when it comes to handling things within India. How is it when you come to trading across borders? How tough is it, and what are your suggestions to make it better?
On trading across borders, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the ease of doing business ranking. And we know that India has improved its ranking substantially, and the ranking is now, the ease of doing business report is actually now stopped. But yet, if we go by the last ranking, we did pretty well. We improved our ranking up to 63rd. We were aiming to be to reach in the top 50, which is excellent. We also have this other survey, which is called the UN Global Survey on Digital and Sustainable Trade Facilitation, which actually maps the extent to which countries are implementing measures that are related to digitization and to sustainability. And what we find is that India scored about 90%, so which is excellent in terms of implementation. But I think when we look at the ease of doing business index, which was brought out by the World Bank, one good thing was that we cracked the formula. And we cracked the formula because we realized that actually the index took into account only two ports, which was JNPT and Tughlakabad. So we made sure that reforms were undertaken in these two ports. But then what this did was that, the other ports were lagging behind, and that kind of widened the divergence between the good performing ports and the poor performing ports. And similarly, when we talk about digitization, the question that is asked is digitization adopted in this particular measure? And the answer is yes or no. So even if you've done it partially, the answer is yes. It doesn't really tell you the extent of digitization that you've actually undertaken. So that becomes a bit of a problem. And in fact, there was a recent study which pointed out that, at all the ports, we are trying to implement something called the port community system, in which all the different agencies within a port are going to be interconnected, interconnected digitally. And basically there is a message exchange system that would operate within them, and they're actually they could be exchanging up to 114 messages between these different systems. But currently, even at JNPT, there are only 6 to 8 messages that are being exchanged. So that's how far we need to go if we want to actually look at how trade facilitation or the extent of digitization can actually bear fruit or bear the right benefits. And the second point is on sustainability. Now that's becoming a huge issue because there is no aspect of development that you can actually look at without looking at sustainability. So, so even on for instance, on the gender score, we scored only 66%. And what the National Trade Facilitation Action Plan does is that it actually lays out point by point what actions need to be taken to improve trade facilitation. Of course, it is driven by our commitment to the Trade Facilitation Agreement. But the interesting point is that we've actually got an action point on mainstreaming gender in trade facilitation. And the Land Port Authority of India has actually gone ahead and made an announcement that in 3 years' time, all the land ports will become gender friendly. So that's the extent. So we can see how we move in different directions, some where there are successes and somewhere not, where we haven't been so successful. So we need to just be mindful of all of these things. Then there's inland transportation, where when we're talking about trading across borders, a huge part of the transportation actually takes part within the country, and that's what we need to be really looking at and concentrating on. And here I think it is the Gati Shakti plan, which is a remarkable initiative. And what it plans to do is to get all major infrastructure projects for all modes of transport for all stakeholders across all agencies. So it is a mammoth exercise. But then the question is, who will implement it, how will we implement it, and when will we implement it? So we need to keep in mind how all of these come together if we really want trade facilitation to be impactful. So these are the points that I had in mind for trading across borders.
Right. So Fazal, if I can come to you, when
Sure.
it comes to investment, M&A, fundraising, how difficult or easy are the Indian policies and its actual implementation?
So first of all, thanks for having this discussion, and I completely agree with what Nisha and before that Rishi were also saying. We see these things day in and day out. As a banker, we are looking at different companies and different business models, and we are helping some of them get funding. We are helping the founders for some of them do M&As, right? Over a period of time, we have seen that the business models that are also emerging is also a function of where we have reached in terms of ease of doing business. Think of it, take a step back and think of it. If Ola was to do this 20 years back, would not have been possible. Think of all the new age companies that are getting into consumer loans or SME lending, the so-called fintech company, and the way they go about their underwriting processes using digital data from various resources. None of this would have been possible probably even 5-6 years back. So we have come a long way. So we are in the right direction. Like my other co-panelists also said, we have been improving not only the ease of doing business, we have been improving the way businesses are run on a day in and day out basis. We are improving the infrastructure. Things are on the right track. But what happens is the more you improve, the more we are aware of where the chances of improvement are. And it is like they say the ye dil mange more types, that the more it is that we ask for. So yes, there has been a lot of improvement, but still there are plenty of things to be done. There are still so many stories of things getting imported and being stuck at the terminals for weeks or months. There are still stories that how somebody came and just used some old law of 50 years back to threaten the founder just to take some money out of, or whatever it is. We keep hearing those stories. We have to reach a level where these stories go down and they become rare. If I have to, I just give you the example of Ola. The way things have changed, Ola or Uber or whoever. If I have to go from Bombay to Delhi tomorrow, I don't have to think of booking a cab. Earlier, 10 years back, I would have talked to somebody that before I land at the airport, somebody should be there. Our thinking has changed. Today, if I want to buy anything, I don't really look at the time. I can order something at 12 in the night because I know that many of these e-tailers are there and things will be available. All these things have happened because of government facilitation. Also because some of these things, when they started, they were in the gray zone. So for example, again, I will come back to Ola and Uber, they were in the gray zone. But the government has taken efforts to streamline them. So there'll be, as we improve, there'll be more and more new age things that will be coming up. It is for us and it is for the government as a facilitator to understand them. And it is for the government to come out with the new regulations that will take them on, making sure that everybody's rights are protected.
Right.
This is how I will sum it up.
Right. Rishi, if I can come to you, what are some of the biggest problems when it comes to ease of doing business in India, according to you? And what are some of the low-hanging fruits that can be easily tackled?
Pran, there's a laundry list of things that are not right with India's ease of doing business. I'll probably start with the first one, which is the most important one. The country has 1,536 acts, 69,233 compliances with 6,618 filings that affect entrepreneurs. Now, no one company needs to comply with all of them. But if I were to give you 100,000 feet assessment of this, there are just too many acts and too many compliances and too many dates, too many returns, too many registers, too many challans. All of these things create complexity. That's the first problem that we have. Over the years, we have been doing a lot of deep work on the subject, and we realize that there's a sufficient amount of redundancy, duplication, overlap in some of these compliances. A number of them have become irrelevant. Now, we need to take the first step and start analyzing them for their relevance today and taking a hard look at them and rationalizing the sheer numbers that are applicable. If I were to give you some examples, if you wanted to set up a pharma manufacturing company in India today, and a small one, single entity, single location, single state operation with one small manufacturing plant and 150 employees, there are about 80 licenses and NOCs that you will need to take to start. Once you start, there are 913 compliances in a year that this company will need to comply with. Now that translates, Pran, into about 4 compliances a day. Now, a company which does between 10 and 20 or 30 crores in revenue, if it has to comply with almost 1,000 compliances a year, imagine the amount of money that they are spending on just compliance. The promoters are spending the time. They've created an army of professionals internally, including a chartered accountant, the company secretary, the labor guys, and then they are liaisoning with consultants outside. We did an assessment of cost of compliance just out of pocket on this company, and it translates into between 1 to 1.5 lakh rupees a month just on consultants, between 4 or 5 consultants that they have to deal with. So this is one of the biggest problems that we have. We need to relook at the compliance burden that we put on the entrepreneurs and significantly rationalize it. The second problem that we have, and we started today's dialogue with that, is the law of the land is not static. It is fluid. It's dynamic. It changes so many times a day, about 15 times a day, about 3,680 times last year, about 4,600 the year before. And these changes affect entrepreneurs. How do they affect? There are changes to dates, changes to deadlines, changes to forms, changes to duty and interest, changes to penalty calculations, addition of a compliance item, so sometimes the removal of a compliance item, although rarely, but sometimes, introduction of new acts. All of these things are examples of things that change on a day-to-day basis. And we did an assessment earlier this year to identify between 600 to 900 of these changes affects a small company. Now, it's like being in flight. The flight is in air, 36,000 feet above the mean sea level, and somebody is trying to tinker with the engine. How do you comply? So that's the second problem that we have. The third problem, and I think Nisha touched upon it briefly, is the problem of Inspector Raj. The law has so much teeth as far as penalty is concerned. 37% of India's compliances have a jail term. A non-compliance in those acts can lead to a jail term. You will hear about this when we release our paper sometime next month, but there is significant amount of criminality that is there in the Indian law. You can send people to jail for not having a male-female sign on the urinals in a factory. So that's an example of some of these problems, which gives a tremendous amount of power in the hands of inspectors. They can roam around your facility, they can show up anytime, there's no obligation of any digital request for inspection. Most states don't have a provision for digital records or identification of issues. They don't have any risk-based digital inspection systems where a company which is more likely to be found on the default side is inspected more often, whereas a compliant company is left to its own devices to grow and focus on its work. So these are some examples of what is not right. I mean, I can go on for another half an hour and discuss 20 other problems, but I think if we are able to deal with a few of these, including a lot of paperwork, a lot of physical records, a lot of departmental visits, lack of digitization, these are all themes that aggravate the problem that we have.
Right. Nisha, if I can come to you, if we look around us in the neighborhood, what are some of the best practices that you think we can pick up from, say, Bangladesh? What have they done right? Vietnam, maybe a China? And will that help to ease some of the pain points when it comes to trading across boundaries?
When it comes to trading across borders, I think we should be looking at global best practices. Our biggest guide is actually the Trade Facilitation Agreement. And fortunately, all the reforms that have actually happened is because we are signatories to that agreement. And that's why it's very important for us to get into other trade agreements as well, because this is what locks in reforms and it forces us to undertake reforms at a pace that is required. Because left to ourselves, we tend not to give guidelines. So rather than picking up a particular country, I would say that we should actually be following global best practices and global conventions if we have to be on top of everything. And we have to begin thinking like a developed country. We want to be one, but we need to be thinking of ourselves as a developed country. On other matters, on ease of doing business, I think startups are now defining our business environment, and so maybe we need a separate ministry for just for startups, which could manage relationships, regulations, paperwork for all of them. We have a separate one for MSME, so maybe we should think of something for the startups as well. The startups also need skilled manpower, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And there is a very unique need that they have, which is that they need people with multiple skills. For instance, in Philippines, they have this, and we need to be training our labor force to cater to these kind of skill needs. Also, I think we need to really our digitization has to be at a full implementation level, whether it is trading across borders, whether it is our own national procedures for our domestic industry, for anything, all across the board, we need to really have full implementation of digitization. And we also have in place right now the national strategy for blockchain, and I think that might actually give the required push, but it remains to be seen how that would get implemented. Also, I think this is quite cliche, but one has to bring it up again, just like we have to keep talking about the Inspector Raj. We continue to face a factor cost disadvantage. Yes, on labor, we have undertaken a lot of reforms, but similarly, power. Compared to Bangladesh today, our power cost is 30 to 40% higher. So even though we have made rapid strides, there are areas now that have become power sufficient, yet it needs to be addressed. The cost needs to come down to bring it on par, to bring our products on par with the international market. And of course, I think compliances, there's nobody better than Rishi who could actually take us through that maze of compliances. Yeah, so these are the recommendations basically for ease of doing business.
Fazal, when it comes to you, a similar question. What can be some of the global best practices that India can adopt, especially when it comes to, starting a company, getting funding, or even winding up?
So, some of the challenges we mentioned earlier, those are the challenges in which we have to look at what is being done in the global level and how do we use the same to make life easier here. For example, I'm told that still whatever you do, if you want to set up a company, you will take like 45 days at least to set it up. Whereas if you want to do the same in the US or some other developed world, it can be done in few days' time. So we have to look at what are being done to facilitate this quick setting up of companies there. I have come across situations where some startups have gone to, because of the compliance requirements, only US or Singapore or some other part of the world to set up their operations. Also, what is being done is that some of these countries are offering swaps for them to set up operations there. I'm aware of a fund from Middle East that invests in Indian companies. That's great. But what also happens is that once they have invested in the company, and if the company decides to set up an office in that Middle East country, the government of that country gives a grant of certain amount to the company and the company benefits from it. Now, those kind of things which go a long way in helping hand to a company in its early days of operation, especially after it has got an institutional funding as well, that will help the company. In terms of compliance, I could not agree with Rishi more. Just to give you an example, I was on a transaction and one of the terms came that as part of the legal documentation that you have complied with all the compliance requirements, and the founder just put his foot down. He said, I can bet on it. Nobody in my industry knows what are all the compliance requirements. How can I say I have done everything? If you want, I can confirm I have not done everything. I cannot confirm that I have done it. So this is the state of affairs. This is the situation we are in, because we are not even sure many a times, even after working for 30 years, 40 years, and this gentleman, he is like 50, 60 years old, so he should know what he is doing. And even then, if you are not very sure where you are, then these are things that we have to kind of do something about. Even if you're talking about winding up operations, there are many companies in India. In fact, I was talking to another founder only yesterday, and the challenges in his case, the DD agencies came up, hey, you know what, you have this company, I understand. There are 2 other companies with the same name that have come up, tell me about it. He said, yeah, I had started them 10 years back. For a variety of reasons, I had to shift location and then I left it there. I have never done anything. But because of that, he's stuck. Now he says that if I have to wind it up, I need to get everything in order for the last 10 years and then do something. And if you are in a startup company, a founder of a startup, which is by definition trying to do a lot of things with the minimal resources, you would like to channelize all your energy on the business and not on the compliance. I'm not for a second saying that compliance is not important, but we should make it commensurate with the size of the company or with the operations of the company, and not like Rishi was saying, ask a company to do hundreds of compliance things even before it has started taking the first step. So these are some of the things we need to do. Some few other things, I mean, those are more mundane and people are working out solutions around it. Like, for example, if you're doing an M&A, it's very difficult to get a funding for M&A in India. You always have to go to some international firms, etc., to get the funding. If you are talking about a deferred payment in an M&A, you are required that only 25%, if it is the foreign buyer, only 25% of the payment can be deferred, and that also only for a maximum period of 18 months. So if there are things that are linked to your future performance, and if it is coming after, let's say, 2 years, that cannot be seen as a result of your sale of the shares, which comes in capital gain. But unfortunately, these gentlemen have to take it as an income and pay a full income tax on that. So there are many nitty-gritties I can go on and on about, but suffice to say that, as I said before, a lot has been done, but a lot still needs to be done.
Right. So, Rishi, if you can stay in this topic, and you've talked about the compliance requirements. There are also laws and compliances which probably have become irrelevant and unnecessary with changing times and even technology. Can you state some of these which have become meaningless now?
Sure, Fran. So there are quite a few which have lost their relevance with the changes in the world. As an example, still you need to maintain a lime wash register in a company, in a factory, right? So you have to make an evidence that you have whitewashed the inner walls of a canteen or inner walls of the toilet once every 4 months, and you have to maintain a register. Now imagine 50 years ago that was a relevant compliance. Today people actually put tiles, vitrified tiles in a bathroom, and the need for whitewash simply goes away, but there is a mandatory compliance around whitewash. How do you deal with that? The other area is spittoons, right? We all know Indians, especially in the manufacturing setup, are used to chewing tobacco and many other things. So in the past, many years ago, there was a need for installing spittoons so that they could spit in those installed spittoons. There are directives on how to clean the spittoon today. Now, at that time, there's no concept of running water in a tap with a wash basin that could have been deployed. Now, a lot of new stuff around wash basins and running water for washing their mouth and everything is available, but we still have requirements for spittoons, and not just installation, but also cleaning of spittoons and stuff like that, followed by jail term in case you fail to do that, right? Additional items, including, in the summer, once upon a time, there was a need felt to write in the law that employer is supposed to provide cool water. Now, in this day and age, some of these requirements have become a part of enterprises. Companies go all out to retain talent. While some of these things are good, but I don't think the law has to be so didactic and attach penalties and provisions for jail term for these kinds of items. Now, I'll give you another example of temperature and humidity registers, right? I mean, factories under the Factories Act of 1948 are required to maintain some of these registers. Now, 50 years ago, yes, there was no way of measuring temperature and humidity automatically. Somebody had to go and hold the thermometer or whatever the device was 3 times a day in the factory and write down in a register as to what the temperature was. Today, you have IoT-based devices that you can simply deploy. Those can not just measure 3 times a day, but 24 hours, 365 on a per second basis. They can raise alarms in case temperatures go above a particular number. All those technologies are available. So the need to have a temperature register, which is a physical register, which deploys, which takes 3 times a day kind of a reading as an example, have practically become meaningless. Under the PF Act, there is an example of maintaining an inspection book. Now, the concept of inspection book is, when did the last time inspector showed up and that entry is there? today in this day and age, everything has become so digital. All these records are kept electronically. When was the last visit? What was the notice issued with a employer code and stuff like that? Maintaining a physical inspection book at the reception of the company and being able to reproduce it when the inspector shows up, I find it fairly meaningless and waste of resources. Now, another example is under the Mining Act. There was a compliance for pit bath. Now, pit bath, just for the people who don't fully understand this, when a worker came out of the mine, coal mine particularly, they had a lot of coal and powder on their body. So there was a concept of a pit bath where the worker was supposed to take a dip and clean himself or herself up when they came out. Now, the law is so didactic. It says 2 rupees ka tel, 3 rupees ka sabun has to be provisioned along with water for the cleanup. Now, in this day and age, first of all, that pit has changed. You can have running water with a tap, right? You don't need to say that the soap has to cost 2 rupees and the oil has to cost 1 rupee. With inflation, all those numbers have become meaningless. So I think we have to refrain from becoming too didactic. We have to talk about the general direction, saying you need to provide reasonable facilities for someone to have a decent cold drinking water, or being able to take shower and clean himself or herself up. I mean, we don't need to go down to the extent of saying that the spittoon should have this kind of surface and you need to scratch the surface once a week. I think we take it too far. And these are all examples, and I can keep going on and on putting number of urinals in a male toilet depending on the male employees that are there. Why do we have to become so didactic about the number of urinals that you need to have? Factories Act writes that based on calculations.
Fascinating. Nisha, if I can come to you, after all the irrelevant stuff that we talk about, what are the top 3 areas that you think India needs to urgently work when it comes to ease of doing business?
I think one issue that we need to look at is tariffs. We need to bring down, we need to rationalize tariffs. We had increased tariffs on a number of items in the hope that we would actually encourage Make in India. But unless we have adequate manufacturing at home, we can't really penalize imports. So there has to be a time frame within which we bring down tariffs or raise tariffs, and we don't do it suddenly, and at the same time we calibrate what is being produced at home. So that calibration definitely needs to be done while we look at the Made in India regime. The other thing, I think Rishi talked about pharmaceuticals. I think defense sector is something that can really give the manufacturing sector a big push, and it needs a different kind of treatment. So the general ease of doing business rules perhaps are not even applicable to the defense sector. So we need to look at, for instance, it's got the security angle, which is very, very different from all other sectors. And there are multiple agencies. And if you're talking about a large proportion of our manufacturing being accounted for by the defense sector, we need to look at how we are going to achieve this and how are we going to create the business environment for manufacturing in the sector to actually happen. The third, of course, is streamlining all the paperwork, the number of forms. I mean, even on the digital front. When we're talking about trading across borders, there are so many forms that continue to be redundant, and we haven't really reduced the number of documents to the extent that we can actually do it. Those are my recommendations.
Right. Fazal, when it comes to startups probably in the technology space, it might be easier, but MSMEs still face a lot of issues when it comes to funding. What is the strength of the credit reporting systems and effectiveness of collateral and the banking laws in facilitating lending?
You're absolutely right. It's the tech companies that still get the lion's share of the funding. Unfortunately, the traditional MSMEs have not got the same treatment. And that's also because the new age companies are trying to disrupt business models using new technology, showing hyper growth, etc. And I'm not surprised that the VCs are chasing them. Having said that, there are things that need to be done also to get the similar kind of interest or get the MSMEs also on the growth path. There are two parts of doing it. If we are talking about some of the equity funding, then probably the government has to take initiatives and come out with some schemes that help them in their funding. SIDBI has done it to some extent. Maybe there are some more initiatives like that required. However, where I see them really struggling is when it comes to any kind of a bank loan, any kind of a debt financing. And there, unfortunately, what happens that the way Indian MSMEs have worked over the last, I'm not talking about 5-10 years, but maybe 40-50 years, is that they have remained a family business where the person who owns, he does not see the company as a very different from himself, does not want to really get into all compliance requirements, does not want to pay all the bills, does not want to pay he will do everything to kind of keep the taxes to the low. He will get into cash mode of a business. Things have changed, but still it has not changed so much. And that these companies have been able to develop a good, strong balance sheet. Unless you have a strong balance sheet, the debt financiers will not look at it. And if your businesses have been on cash in any way, it will be difficult for you to get the loans. What's heartening me now is that what I had also mentioned a while ago, the fintech companies that are coming out, they are looking at it, the same companies from a different angle. They are looking at the digital footprint. They are looking at what they are doing. So people are, for example, getting to supply chain financing. So if you are a vendor to, let's say, Unilever or Coca-Cola, they know where you are doing. They can look at what kind of businesses you have been doing, and based on that, they can give you certain kind of a debt financing based on the business that they see you doing it in and out every day. It has helped that the digital infrastructure has gone up, and it has helped in all this monitoring. What will help is some more proliferation of that. What will help is if the banks and some of the government institutions also start doing that. They have been doing it, but they have been doing piggybacking on some of these fintech providers. The other thing that I see, which is a very positive sign to me at least, is there are companies that are coming up as what they call embedded finance, in the sense that they give you the ability to finance your vendors with the people that you are working with. Even though you may not have the infrastructure, they become your infrastructure partner. You look at the bills, they give you even the underwriting engine. You can change the rules to tweak it to your requirement, but you use them to give them the right loans, etc. And as a banker, what I see day in and day out, that it doesn't matter which vertical you look at. You look at whether it is the food or transportation or pharmaceutical, any vertical you look at. If you look at the B2B business, there'll be financing at the core of it. And if you drill down, you will realize that financing is the biggest problem that everybody faces. If you can take care of these by doing some of these things, that will go a long way in helping them. That will make their life a lot easier.
Right. Last question, and it says the same for everyone. Rishi, starting with you. What can the budget do? I know it can do a lot of things, but what can be, say one or two things that the budget can do when it comes to ease of doing business?
Sure. Few things. First, the budget should set aside, some money for creating a national compliance commission. Hope is not a strategy. If we have to rationalize the number of applicable acts and compliances, a team of experts will need to sit down across a table, deliberate, review, catalog, identify the relevance, identify duplications, and so on and so forth, and cut the number of compliances. So that's one wish I have from the budget: set up a national compliance commission with a clear mandate of reducing the number of applicable acts and compliances. Second, government did a fantastic job with DigiLocker in the retail space. A consumer like you and I can go and download our registration cards and stuff like that from DigiLocker. I would wish government does a concept of enterprise DigiLocker, where all the registrations, licenses, consent orders, NOCs, various kinds of returns registers that are applicable to the enterprise needs to be there in the DigiLocker, so that we can move towards a paperless enterprise, paperless compliance. Third, I would want government to earmark some money for setting up a utility for universal enterprise numbers. Today, an enterprise has at least 20 plus identities. You have a different PF number, a different ESI number, different TAN, PAN, SIN, GST number, and there's no one identity of an enterprise in order to create any profile. So if you have to create a compliance profiling and inspectors have to be given authorization to target companies for physical inspections, we need to create a system where we can do some profiling based on a unified identity so that this history creation, profile creation, behaviors profiling, all of those things can be done. So I think these are the top 3 areas, and I can go on for another 10 minutes and give you another 10 ideas, but I think if budget has to start somewhere in enabling ease of doing business, these would be my top 3.
Nisha, what about you? What are your views?
Yeah. I think firstly, the budget has both tax related or other incentive measures, and the other is the revenue neutral measures. So clearly it is the revenue neutral measures which are less talked about, but because businessmen can't see the immediate impact of such measures, but they are more long lasting and they go towards changing the entire business environment. And so that's why those are as important as just looking for tax reliefs and financial incentives. And that's where this entire all our compliances and regulations, an efficient regulatory framework, this is where a lot of effort needs to go in. Or if you're talking about financial incentives, then maybe because startups are very important to our business environment right now, we could actually look at incentivizing them into getting into maybe manufacturing, and even within the tech space, we could incentivize some of them to move into solving societal issues. That would be a great contribution. And I think those who are working with startups would also know, for instance, the downside of startups is the failures and the kind of mental health issues that it has led to. So that is, so we need to begin thinking about all of these things in totality when we're talking about ease of doing business and the mental being of those who are in the business environment. Also, I think there need to be incentives that need to be given to women entrepreneurs and to women in trade. That I think would be a very important issue that this budget should get into, should address. Even our gender budgeting, for instance, the proportion of gender budget has actually come down to 4.4% last year from about 4.7% in 2006. So we should definitely make an effort to increase the gender budget in the coming budget.
Right, Fazal? Last word with you.
Sure. So I would agree with whatever Rishi and Nisha have said, and whatever they have said sums it up even for the startups, whether it is about cutting down on compliances or setting them up. A couple of other things I will mention for the same community is, one is that emphasis on skill development. If you talk to the startups, and I talk to 10 of them kind of every day, the single biggest problem they have today is we don't get the right people, not on the tech. At the same time, if I look around, and I have come across the guys and girls who have passed out from various engineering colleges, and many of them are still searching for a job. So there is a disconnect somewhere, where we have engineering graduates looking for a job, and we have companies who are looking for people with engineering or such skill sets. I think we have to bring some reform that the employability of these people who are passing out from various colleges is better, whether it is through reskilling, whether it is through taking a deeper look at the curriculum used by some of these institutions. I'm not in a position to say that, but I see a disconnect, and there's a way of making the ends meet. So That's very important. Second, I will say that all these startups, yes, they are doing a great job. They are also funded by investors and who are also doing a great job of keeping them going. Unfortunately, still, the way we see investments in unlisted companies is different from the way we see the investment in listed companies. Whether it is the rate of capital gain or whether it is the timing for converting it to long-term capital gain, that is also different. Although I'm sure everybody will agree that investing in an unlisted company is far more risky than investing in a listed company. I mean, we need to find a way of bringing them to parity, both in terms of timelines and both in terms of the rate of the capital gain. These are my thoughts. These are my hopes from the budget.
Wonderful. I think ease of doing business is one topic where we can go on, but we'll have to stop here. Thank you everyone for your views. It was lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mangal.
Thank you.
Thank you.